What's up, fam? I wanted to make this presentation for all of you because right now I'm in training and it's getting pretty intense, and I am 1 month out from my next fight. So normally I take a night off during the week to to do a health talk, and now I'm going to do them virtually. That way I can continue training, but I can also give you all value. So I want this talk is called The Dynamics of Being. And the reason why I created this is because I wanted to give you a way of looking at yourself, of your life, that is congruent with both biology and the philosophy that I share with you. So it's really important that as we're moving through this healing journey together, that we have a common understanding. Um, and so, like I talk a lot about um, reaching out into the field and connecting with more subtle parts of you and your being. But what does that even mean? And and is it valid? And so nothing that I'm sharing with you is the truth. Like, I'm just going to be clear with you. Like, I don't have the truth, but I do think that I can give you information that I think is true, in the sense that true in the sense that it'll lead you to whatever the truth is. And really, that's what this is about. So, see if I can get to the next slide here. So, the all that you are. Uh, this is a real esoteric way of explaining or describing who we are, or like who is and what is the human being. And years ago, I was taught that that life is it's an intelligence expressing itself through matter by a force. And that was such a fascinating it was a fascinating way to think about what the human experience is. It's like, well, what is this intelligence? And the matter is clearly the body, and what is this force behind, and this what I'm going to share with you, I think, is a really um, simple way to explain what that statement is. So, as humans, we have a physical body, and many of us are taught that it begins and ends there. We're just this body, we're just this lump of flesh, and all of our experiences are just some physical process or some chemical process. Um, but as you walk into a room and you get vibes from somebody, you're like, dude, like, I got this weird feeling. Like, what is that, right? Like, there's an energetic exchange of information that is causing your body to pick up certain vibes. So there's stuff going on outside of us, and so we have a physical body, and then we have an emotional body, um, and the physical body, it can operate. Just give it oxygen. If people go brain dead, you just give it oxygen, and it'll keep the heart pumping. And then we also have the emotional body. We have, what is emotion? Emotion is energy in motion. There's constant energy flowing to and through us and from us. So we have this emotional sphere of us, um, and then we have the lower mental. And now this is the beginning of thinking. At first, it's kind of like, you're this physical body, then it's like the feeling of life, right? But there's not really thinking involved. And now we're dealing with lower mental, and that's thinking about uh, it's thinking, but based on survival. It's based on the immediate needs of the body. Like, hey, when am I going to eat next? It's based on just getting from point A to point B. Lower mental thinking is super important because we gotta mow our lawn. We gotta pay our bills. Like, absolutely. There is a legitimate need for this, right? Like, you got to take care of what's actually in front of you. But if if all we have is tunnel vision, and all we can see is maybe a foot in front of us, it's not going to help us out for long term, or bigger life goals and those things. So from the lower mental, we have the upper mental, and upper mental, now we're thinking about much bigger picture. We're thinking about legacy. We're thinking about our grandchildren. We're thinking about people as a whole. But what's really cool is that instead of thinking about the needs of the body, upper mental, you're asking big questions like, who am I? This presentation is an upper mental based presentation because we're looking at the big picture. We're looking at primary aim, who we are on a soul level. And then the next sphere is its soul, itself. It's the true you. It's everything below is ego, you know. But soul, when I say an intelligence expressing itself through matter by a force, this intelligence is soul. And this is the beginning of form. And so when you, as we expand into like greater, more subtle fields of who we get more connected into who we are in our authenticity. So soul self, the upper mental wants to know soul, and it wants to know who truly we are, our true identity. And there's a difference between the I and the me. And then outside is we have source, field, God. When I say intelligence expressing itself through matter by a force, this is the force. And this force works through every single sphere of who we are. And this is the literal energy that we use to move forward. This is the literal energy that we tap into that's inside of every one of you that unravels the bound areas and places in our life and in our body and transmutes that into actual usable energy. So we're physical beings, we're emotional beings. We have lower thinking, we have higher thinking, and then we have our true identity, which is soul, self. And then we have the universe, we have source, we have God, we have field. Um, let's go on our next slide here. And we're constantly, information is constantly flowing through all these subtle things. And so the question is, and we're going to get into this a little later, is like, what is causing the body to behave? Like what's causing your physical vessel to move in life? Is it just the emotions? Are you reactive on emotions? Is it just like lower thinking stuff and you're pissed off in traffic jams? Are you an intellectual and thinking about bigger pictures of things? Like what is causing you to act? Is the is the subtle message, the whisper of soul, getting through the other layers to your body so that you're making moves according to who you are on a soul level or not? So now I want to just talk about the components of you, like what really makes you. So those things we talked about the layers that make you into the being that you are, right? But we kind of talked from the inside out. However, um, I mentioned what is really the root of our behavior. You know, um, you know, is it emotions, right? Like, are we just emotional, reactive people? Are we lower mental people? If if we're constantly thinking in lower mental, then the emotions we're going to experience are going to be more, probably more negative in the sense of like fear, jealousy, insecurity. You're going to be feeling a lot of sexual things, but it's like a lot more primal based things, right? But when you start to look at the upper mental life, you're going to be experiencing things like joy and patience and delayed gratification, uh, bliss, because you're probably going to be taking on uh, much bigger risks in life, right? But the payoffs are going to be bigger. You'll be dealing with the same exact situations, but with a whole different way of looking at it. And so there's going to be a lot different experiences of emotions. And when we are connected to who we are on soul and purpose level, our behavior is going to be a lot different. The emotions are going to be a lot different as well. So as you see that you can be in the same situation, but depending on how you show up depends on how you behave. Now, from the physical body, we have our families, we have our loved ones, right? And this definitely the very closest to us, right? Um, and then we also have our finances, and it's not so much about like fiat currency, but this is about um, your personal economy. You know, like how are you exchanging the energy in your life? Money is a representation of energy. So how are you exchange? Are you giving more than you're receiving? Are you taking more than you're giving? Because these kinds of the answer to these questions, it goes into our wealth, it goes into our finances, it goes into our relationships. So finances, your personal economy. And then we have our social life. We have our friends, and we have like how do we show up in our community? Like how do we interact with other people in our sphere? And then we have career. And what is the legacy that we're creating on this planet? You know, are we just putting all of our time into just being a checker at a grocery store, putting our head down and just trying to get from Monday through Saturday, or are we looking at life like every freaking day means something and everything I do matters, everything I say and everything I don't say matters? It's a big deal and it's a big difference of how we show up. So behavior, all of these spheres in some way are competing to uh, to express through the body. And behavior is the change in activity of an organism in response to a stimulus. And the question is, what is the stimulus? What's getting through? Is it the whisper of the soul? Is it just the big intellectual landscape of, trying to understand Plato and Socrates? Is it just the grind of trying to get to Friday or get to the next paycheck? Is it the fear or the insecurity, the jealousy, like just these deep emotions that are just moving the body? Important questions to ask yourself. So I talked about the kind of the esoteric example of these subtle fields that we are, but I want to tie that into biology. Like, how does that's a really cool, interesting way of maybe explaining life and the human being. But is there any root in biology uh, that backs up what I'm saying? And I think that there is. And so on the left here, you see this is a cell membrane, and you have receptors on the outside of the cell, and of course, outside of the cell is its environment. And so cells are interesting because when you actually break down what a cell can do a cell has its own nervous system, it has its own immune system, it has to eat, it has to poop, it has all kinds of functions inside, organs, and or it has organelles and those things that function just like our organs do. It has well, I just said it has a brain, um, and when you look at the functions of a cell in a human, they're identical. And this is a trip. The cells are made of structures. They're made of structures called proteins. And proteins to a cell are the equivalent to a cell to the human body. All the structures, they're made of proteins. Now, the brain of the cell isn't the nucleus, it's the membrane. And its receptors and effectors allow or disallow the signals from the environment to enter into the cell. So a lot of us are taught that the nucleus of the cell is the brain. However, we know that it's not the brain because if you remove the brain from any organism, the organism dies immediately. Well, when scientists have removed the nucleus from The cell continues living, sometimes for months. And the only reason why the cell dies is because the DNA is inside the nucleus. And if it's going to replicate any of its parts to get old, it has to use the nucleus to get DNA to to create new proteins and replace proteins that are old. So the nucleus is not the cell. The nucleus actually is it's the gonads. It's like it's the it's what gives the genes to reproduce parts of the cell. So just want to be clear about that. So the brain is the membrane, and there's receptors on this membrane that allow signals from the environment to enter or not enter the cell. The signals are what cause the protein in the cell to move, and this movement is behavior. Very interesting, right? So we're looking at like what is basic movement is behavior. And you're saying that, and I'm saying that there's signals that cause the proteins in the cell to move, signals from the environment. The behavior of the protein determine what genes get expressed from the nucleus of the cell. So this is really interesting. So if the signal tells the proteins to how to behave, and if that behavior dictates what genes get expressed from the cell, from the nucleus, we're tying in the fact that it's the signal received from the cell's environment are what determine the cell's behavior, the quality of life, and the genetic expression. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is that in epigenetics, which is what we're talking about when it's beyond the genes, genes load the gun, right? But it's the environment that pulls the trigger, not the genes themselves. So if we are in the belief that, oh, I have bad genes, or it's just, it's in my family, and that is not accurate. Now you have genes. You have plenty of genes, and but every single one of these genes can be expressed in 20,000 different variations. You have as many genes as a fruit fly does. However, it's the signal from the environment that causes what genes get expressed and how they get expressed. Like for example, the breast cancer gene, it's the same gene as the ovarian cancer. It's the same exact gene. However, that gene has thousands and thousands of other ways that it could be expressed other than cancer. So it's really interesting when you start to look at that. And now we're going to talk even more about genes as well, because in a couple slides where I'm gonna go back to that. I want to talk about embryogenesis. So we talked about a cell. So we talked about, all these subtle, um, the spheres of who we are as a human being, and it seems that like form begins at soul level, form, not matter, but form, and it kind of collapses inwards from form all the way to the physical material body. And it's interesting how you have form, soul, then you have this thinking, right? And then you have feeling, and then you have this physical body. And it seems kind of backwards to how we're taught, but when you look at everything around you in your room right now with you, everything that you see was created through thought before it appeared. Everything was created through thought. And if you look at the the Hermetics, I forgot the basically they're man, I got a brain fart here, but there's 7 laws of Hermetics, and one of those laws is it's mentalism, that everything is created from a thought. And so as we collapse from the outside in, here we are. And it very much seems that we have been created clearly um, through some organizing agent thinking us into existence before we just pop up. So embryogenesis. So in the womb, the the zygote, it breaks up it starts dividing and dividing and dividing. And then once it's done dividing, it creates three base layers. They're called germ layers of a cell. And so a human's fetus forms from the germ cells. And there's three layers. There's the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. So the endoderm, it's the innermost layer, it forms the vital organs. The mesoderm, the muscle, that's the middle layer. It creates the muscle and all the connective tissue. Now the ectoderm, the outer layer of this germ layer, it forms two things: the central nervous system and the skin. Important. Well, I just told you that the brain of the cell is this membrane. The brain of the cell is this membrane. It's not the nucleus. And now and I talk about how humans and cells are identical in function. Well, the human skin and the nervous system are created from the same layer of the germ cell. And on the skin are all of our receptors: our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, our tongue, um, all of our receptors. And so we receive information from our environment through our receptors. And what's the most consequential isn't what we're seeing, but it's how we perceive the information from our environment, just like the cell, right? Because this is the root of behavior, right? How we perceive. Like if I see you as a threat, then I'm going to act threatened. I'm going to behave in a threatened manner. But if I see you as a friend or a foe, I'm going to behave differently. Um, and so it's the same thing with a human being, is what I'm trying to paint this picture for you. And depending on how we receive the information, depends on how we behave. And so here we have, you're either going to be, happy. Let's see if I can move this. I think I can. Or if we're going to have our hands, in our face and we're stressed out or whatever. Um, and so this is just such a simple way to articulate that we're just a fractal. The little things reflect the big things, and the big things reflect the little things. Like, we're clearly connected in scale. So as I talked about cells and um, and how the signal causes the proteins to move, and but we have this phenomenon in life called dis-ease. A lot of us think about cancer and heart disease, but dis-ease at its very core level is when proteins or organs or organ systems or organisms start to behave in a way that's not natural. That's not contrite to its nature. And so when we dive into like what is the root of disease? Well, this is interesting because I talked to you earlier about epigenetics and genes, and oh, it's all in the family and I got bad genetics. Well, I want you to know this, that birth defects, this is all CDC stuff, but birth defects affect only 3% of all babies born in the United States. Only 3% of people born have bad genes. They are born with bad freaking genes. In 2018, 51, so over half of the people in the United States have at least one chronic condition, disease, and a third of them have more than one chronic condition. So the question is this: if 97% of people are born with good genes, they have no birth defects, then what is causing their disease? Their disease. And so this goes back to the question about the signal in the protein. So if the signal causes the proteins to move, and the proteins are behaving weird, right? Proteins are, the behavior is not normal, but there's nothing wrong fundamentally with the proteins, then what's the issue? It would be the signal. it would be an issue with the signal. And so what we're seeing here is 97% of the people that are dealing with diseases is not is it's not the disease caused by their own issues, like their own fundamental inborn issues with their genes. It's an issue with signals from their environment. And so if it's the signal, what excuse me, if it's the signal, what will cause the signal to get messed up? If it's not the proteins, if it's not the person's body that's the problem, is if it's the signal, well, what messes up the signal? Well, first thing is trauma. Physical trauma can totally jack up the signal. If you break your back, or you cut some veins or some arteries, or you have deep bruising or information's not going to get in, and information's not going to get out. That can absolutely mess up the signal from the environment. If you get stabbed in the eye, you can't see. So you're not going to be able to get information in, right? If you have hearing issues, or if you have issues with taste or smell, you can misinterpret what the environment is trying to say to you. The next thing is toxicity. Chemicals can mess up the signal. The American diet is terrible. MSG and high levels of free radicals, and our air quality, all this stuff, pollution. I mean, we can go on and on and on, causing issues. Um, there are 300,000 people a year or more, actually, that die from taking prescription drugs exactly the way they're supposed to take it. Toxicity. And then lastly, thoughts, thinking. Our thinking is the number one cause of the signal getting messed up. It's it's basically, I mean, um, imagine your parents telling you when you're 5 years old that, like, um, all all Mexican people are bad. All black people are bad. They're all dangerous, right? Like, these are real things, right? By the way, like being a black man, like, I've had so many conversations with people, like, they see on TV or whatever, like, you see this representation and you expect people in real life to be like this representation, right? And it's like, it's not true. But like our thoughts, right? Our thoughts can betray us if and so who influences our thoughts? Well, we learn from people. We learn from TV. People can cause trauma in our life. People can hurt us, like, physically, right? Doctors can prescribe things, and if you notice this, right? If you get physically hurt, now you're on pain pills, right? Like, or you're on medications, and it's causing the body not to, it's causing more problems in the body. And then since you don't feel good, you don't think good, right? You don't think good, you make dumber decisions, and you hurt yourself more physically. So you can see that there's a cycle with this stuff, right? It's like, I call it the sympathetic windup, but there's a cycle, and it's very hard to get out of this cycle. Um, and the key to doing this is personal responsibility. It's taking personal responsibility for your life, for your thoughts, for your physical health, and for what you put in your body. So the signal is something that incites to action. And my question to all of you is, what signals are getting through in your life to you? And from where? So what are the things that are influencing your behavior? Like, ask yourself, like, what is truly, like, influencing your behavior, causing your proteins to move in your environment? How do you perceive the energy in your life? This is a crucial thing. Right now I'm training to get back into the boxing ring. And there has been times in my past, um, I have 18 fights. This will be my 19th fight, and I was just absolutely terrified of getting in there. I mean, I did, but I was terrified. But also, there's been times I got into the ring that I'm super excited, right? Like I'm excited to be able to get to do this. And it's the same exact thing, but the way that I'm perceiving the energy has changed, right? And so this has to do with what kind of thinking is behind this. So what kind of thinking? How do you perceive the energy in your life? Is it lower mental thinking, upper mental thinking? What story do you make up about the energy? So we have emotion, right? The emotion itself is the energy in motion, but our feelings, that's the story we make up about the energy because when you start to when we shift from emotions to feeling, there has to be some level of thinking involved, right? Like I am happy, I'm sad, I'm mad. There has to be some kind of um, lower intellectual processing that's going to help you identify what I feel, right? So what story do you make up about the energy in your life? One thing is, when you do think, do your thoughts belong to you? Are they your thoughts, or are they someone or something else's? Are you thinking things like, "Yeah, I'm stupid. I'm fat. I'm not good enough." Like, is that unique to you? You know, you're just like your father. You're just like your mother. You're never going to make it. Like all these thoughts, right? Like these entities, do they belong to you? And if they don't, who or what do they belong to? And lastly, is love for your life pushing you, or is fear of your life pulling you? Either way, you're moving. But are you running towards heaven, or are you just running away from hell? Very important questions to ask yourself. What's the driving force? And this ties in. Are you connected to who you are at soul level? Are you connected to your true identity? Or are you just... That's right. So we covered a lot. We covered a lot of ground. And the main takeaway is that the signals from our environment are what dictate our behavior. The body is not the beginning. It's actually maybe the halfway or the end point um, of our reaction or response to whatever the stimulus is. And I want you to really just meditate on what is causing you to move in your life. This quote, let yourself be drawn by the stronger pull of that which you truly love. And that's really what I invite you all to do as well, is find out what you truly love, find out who you truly are, and let that be the pull that guides you through life rather than the push that forces you into a place that you may not want to go. So I love you all, and I wish you a powerful and meaningful life experience on a daily basis. And I look forward to seeing you all in person in the studio soon. Have a wonderful day. Bye bye.